Greetings, Christopher J. here with another episode of Gnomes Newcomers, where we learn the real reasons why people are moving to South Dakota in mass numbers. I have the distinct privilege today to be joined by Ron Froelich, who taught for 32 years, ladies and gentlemen, in higher education in the field of health sciences and virology. Wow, what a timely subject for what is going on in our country right now. Ron, thank you very much for joining us in Gnomes Newcomers.
Thank you, Chris. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
You bet. Such a wealth of experience in the classroom, in the trenches, in health science. Great many years of teaching in some very notable universities, Ron. And here you are in South Dakota. You just moved here, and we just want to get a feel for your take on this whole coronavirus. But before we get there, tell our viewers a little bit about your background in teaching and what you taught for 32 years and how it relates to the coronavirus.
Okay, Chris, thanks. I taught in what I call the allied health science field, and that was predominantly to either nurses, pre-med, dental hygiene, those kind of people. And I taught. I have advanced degrees in microbiology, so that kind of encompasses the fields of two areas: bacteria and viruses. So I taught bacteriology and virology. In addition to teaching that, I also taught anatomy and physiology, and I taught immunology and epidemiology, and was a field epidemiologist for 3 different health departments. So that's kind of the scope of the background, but my emphasis today is, and what brought me to South Dakota, is of course dealing with the pandemic and the coronavirus, which I have taught about, but not necessarily this specific serotype, because of the fact that the coronavirus has caused the common cold, and so they've been around for a long time, and so I'm familiar with them from that standpoint.
A lot of myths, a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of investigating that needs to be done to really get to the heart of what coronavirus is. So based on your background, not only in education, but living in the West Coast, Ron, what was it like to live in states like Oregon and Washington when the COVID outbreak came onto the scene compared to what it's like in South Dakota and the decisions that Governor Noem made?
Oh, it was very different, Chris. I was originally in the state of Washington when COVID began, and there was a tremendous amount of lockdowns and closures of schools, and of course no more going to church, and no more going to weddings, and no more seeing your loved ones in nursing care facilities, etc. And it was very difficult for me, and I have friends that are there still, and the situation became just increasingly worse and bad. And so I had an opportunity to go anywhere to live because my wife had recently passed away. So I came out to the state of North Dakota first, because I'm originally from there, and then spent some time there, and then moved back down here to the Rapid City area where I now live. And that was a personal choice I made because of some very, very important issues to me relative to freedoms and so forth, which the governor of the state was very instrumental in actually helping me to make that decision.
Yeah, so we talk about fear, when it comes to COVID and the lockdowns and all that creates in the atmosphere, and people getting scared and wearing masks everywhere. Can you talk a little bit about the differences here in South Dakota compared to where you came from, specifically when it comes to lockdowns and mandates and the whole mask wearing?
Yeah, as I said, Chris, it's a very different situation here in South Dakota. Governor Noem has said, I'm not going to lock the state down. I'm not going to determine what is an essential business. They're all essential. And she talked about personal freedoms and liberties. One of the things she also said about it was that one of her decisions to actually approach it in this manner is she made a statement that I remember, that she said, I'm not going to seize power. And that's, of course, what the governors of Oregon and Washington did under a lot of what I would call unnecessary pretense and fear, of course, which is a terrible way to live, and I chose not to live that way.
Yeah, that's a huge distinction in leadership. It really is.
It's a huge distinction.
Can you talk a little bit for our viewers about the benefits of immunity when it comes to COVID, Ron?
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because in actuality, there's two types of immunity. There's your own natural immunity, and then there's induced immunity. The vaccines are designed to produce what we call induced immunity, but have failed miserably, and I think we're all pretty cognizant of that. But there's so much downplay by Dr. Fauci and others about natural immunity, and natural immunity is what got us here in the first place, because we haven't had antibiotics or vaccines for even less than 100 years. And yet our whole humanity, human society, has managed to come through that and live. And the question you have to ask yourself is, how did that occur? And the answer is, we have natural immunity too. And that is just overlooked. It's just, and downplayed by so-called experts in the field often, and it just shouldn't be. And so the idea about immunity is, and I think that's why I'm writing a book right now, is that a lot of people don't understand exactly how immunity is produced. But the vaccines, the word vaccine, or the definition of vaccine in Stedman's Medical Dictionary, for example, says that it is a preparation that is to provide what we call immunological prophylaxis. If you look at the word prophylaxis, prophylaxis means to prevent, not to ameliorate disease. So what has happened now with the vaccines? You get the vaccine, you get a booster, you get another booster, and you still get the virus. That's not supposed to happen.
That's very eye-opening to share that kind of information and background coming from someone like you who has been in this field for so long. You're still teaching part-time, and you just mentioned your book. Can you talk a little bit about the subject matter and the inspiration behind the book?
Yeah, I just have become so disgusted and frustrated about the lack of providing enough knowledge. If you're going to debate something or fight some kind of a pathogen, you're going to have knowledge about it, and the knowledge base is not there. And it's not there because they're being told the wrong things or not being fed the correct information. So my book is to take the approach of what I call common sense. Common Sense Coronavirus is what the title of the book will be. And the point being that I need to actually talk more about the virus, the size of the particle, how it affects whether masks are effective or not effective, which I do in the book. Talk about vaccines and what they are doing or not doing, etc. But basically, more or less, to help the common layperson better face this threat and have the knowledge to make credible decisions based on hope, not fear.
You know, that's incredible, Ron, because something just went off in my mind. It takes real leadership to peel the layers back on an onion, so to speak, if I use an analogy, to get to the root of what really is going on. And sadly, we don't get that in the mainstream media. We just get these real high-level talking points. Someone like you is rolling up his sleeves through your book project and getting to the core root of those answers. And we certainly look forward to your book and learning what those answers are so people can live a better, healthier life. That's what it all comes down to. Ron, you and I both recently moved to South Dakota. Can I ask you, why do you think so many people are moving to this great state?
Well, I think largely because of the same reasons that brought us here. But, when I was asked to do this, I looked up some things, some quotes from Governor Noem that actually started the process for me back in 2021 when I was actually living up in North Dakota, when she did the State of the State address. And she said, and I quote here, "Come to South Dakota to live your life as you see fit." And that's what I chose to do, number one. Number two, she also said we will always remain open optimists. We don't live, give in to fear, and neither do I. Then she said in CPAC, at our CPAC meeting, she said, as a conservative and an educator, I really relate to this. She says conservatives do not shun people who think for themselves, and that, as an educator, is important to me because critical thinking is what this is all about. And she says we will not be sheep. And then lastly, and I'd like to share this one with you, she said the people of South Dakota can be trusted to make good decisions. We have common sense. That's why people want to live here, and that's why I love living here, and that's why I moved here.
Yeah, that's amazing. From one educator to another, Ron, the critical thinking is huge.
It is.
And the more we can do that, we will be able to preserve what we hold true here in America, right here in South Dakota. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Ron?
Yeah, I'd like to share a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King, which kind of puts this in perspective as well, but it adds a special final note, I think, as to why we're doing what we're doing and why we're moving here and why we love the leadership of Governor Noem. And Martin Luther King said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter, and this matters."
You bet it matters. Thank you so much, Ron, for joining us today and sharing your wisdom
Thank you.
and your experiences. Well, there you have it, folks. I hope you enjoyed this installment of Noem's Newcomers. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.